Um, so good morning, everybody. Welcome to this. This is a panel on open source and AI, or AI and open source. And I think we did that in particular to not be confusing with open source AI, and we'll get into that a little bit in a moment. And so we're gonna do a quick brief self-introductions so that we can all just say who we are. And part of that is that there's something unique about a point of view that we each provide around open source and around AI from our background and what we work on. And my goal as a moderator is to not answer and not to dive in and be part of the conversation in that way, but to ask the questions and help drive it. Part of this is because there are people in this audience who I would trust to speak for me in a room like this without any hesitation. So if they have questions, they'll ask them. I don't need to. It's like it's great. So I'm really happy to I get the easy part today. So let me start at the far end here with Toby, and we can work our way this way. Just a quick self-introduction.
Hello, my name is Toby Morning, local software developer, and also work at a B2B SaaS fund called Musa Capital, $25 million B2B SaaS fund. We look for companies that have at least one Black founder, and we're actively looking for startups.
Great. So hi, everybody. I'm Leilani Gilpin. I'm an assistant professor of computer science. I teach artificial intelligence. And before I came here, I worked at a variety of different companies, most recently Sony AI, but I also worked at Xerox for years.
Hi, my name is Alexy Khrabrov. I'm AI community architect at Neo4j, the graph database company. Before that, I've been at IBM and director of open source science, which is an initiative I established. And I found Carlos who validated it, and that's how I found this beautiful place. I want to thank everybody for putting us here at this wonderful bar.
Yeah, this is a great event. I've been so glad we're doing more open source things up here. And we have an event, we have a conference hotel building built in Santa Cruz. Pretty soon we'll be able to really do the hosting. My name is Karsten, and I'm open to work, but I'm also the founder of Open Community Architects, and I worked for more than 20 years at Red Hat and worked in open source projects there. The last year and change, I've been working with Toby, for example, with founders and startups and having a lot of interesting conversations. One reason I really wanted, particularly why I wanted Toby here to help round things out when we had Leilani and Alexy, was that we kind of have a bit of the pipeline of what happens in the world, where people are going through school, learning how to do things, going out in the world and starting businesses and trying to make things be successful. And that connection of research, academia, NGOs, and startups is a particular underserved niche in the world, I think, that doesn't really get a lot of attention in terms of money and funding and other things, but it's also where a lot of things are happening. So let's see. So I'm going to go ahead and I want to give a little bit of an overview of kind of just a quick opening, a moderator opening, and the thesis that we're going to be discussing over here today. Yeah, I did actually put the thesis on there, but if we want to put it on there, I can edit it and drop it in. But so in essence, let me just get started from this part. At this point, the blend of AI and machine learning and open practices with domain examples of open source, open science, open scholarship, open data, and so forth. They all have the potential to positively affect the world in ways exponentially more powerful than what we've achieved in open source alone. Open source has progressed through the democratization of collaboration and creation, but in fact, the barrier has been high for most people to participate and benefit. The thesis to consider with our topics and questions today is the blend of AI and open source, what we so-called open source AI, brings many orders of magnitude more risk and reward than open source alone has brought, but only if it iterates and improves on the meaning and practice of open. Open source works because it is a frictionless space for collaboration. This open collaboration relies upon a factual and a cultural basis for people to know they can collaborate at will. So factual as in license, cultural as in the mores. To be open means a space where permission is understood to be already granted. Thus, open has a widely understood definition across many disciplines, and you can look this up at opendefinition.org. Open means anyone can freely access, use, modify, and share for any purpose, subject at most to requirements that preserve provenance and openness. Put most succinctly, open data and content can be freely used, modified, and shared by anyone for any purpose. The open definition identifies the unwavering requirements of freedom to access, use, modify, and share. These four aspects of open are essential to create and foster the factual, legal, and cultural reality for a truly frictionless collaboration of open. So before it comes up in discussion, so we can set this aside, there is an active conversation and debate right now around the open source AI definition. And one of the main points of disagreement is what to do when an AI model does not provide a training data set under an open data license. And it turns out to be a sticky problem for many model creators. They ultimately need the rights sometimes down to the original objects being used in a data set, whether images or documents or any other data type. But just for the purpose of the conversation today, we're going to go for the closest meaning to the definition of open for when we say open source AI, and it means open source software, open weights, and open data. And so wherever the panelists in the conversation need to be able to specify, if you need to, you can get into more detail, say I mean open weights or something, because some of the conversations are about like which matter, does it matter to have open data and so forth from your perspective. So that's just me setting the table. Let's get into the questions and conversation. So with all that thoughts up in mind, the first question is just around transparency of like when it comes to AI and how and from your perspective in the world, does it matter to have open source, open weights, or open data? Any or all three, and how would you ratio those things together? And now, do you have any examples of risks and rewards around choosing to do open source, to do open weights, to do open data, or any other open that might be required in doing an AI system? So, we can jump. Does anybody have ready to jump in? Alexy's not.
I can take a stab at this, right?
Please.
So just to give a little background. So I've been kind of helping to convene some of the regional communities around open source AI. So one is generative AI Commons at the Linux Foundation, and the other is the AI Alliance, which is IBM, Meta, and 100 other companies. So this topic comes up. And so in Gen AI Commons, we specifically have something called Model Openness Framework. Who heard about Model Openness Framework? So that's basically a Linux Foundation way to classify openness of models, right? So there is class 1, class 2, class 3, and the most open one is everything you said plus scripts, right? So basically the architecture. So you have the weights, you have the data, you have the infrastructure set up required to reproduce it, right? Because the devil's in the detail. You cannot expect, people to take a complex system and be able to reproduce it without knowing how it was built. So training scripts and infrastructure is important, and that, which is influencing to academics, a paper, right? So basically 4 things. And so, I mean, the folks who started model openness frameworks also in academia, and so they kind of call it open science level, right? Where everything is. So I would say that's like the holy grail, right? And then you can kind of goes downhill from there, and then kind of you might have this murky area where people do what's now called open washing, where they call it open source, and in fact they only give you the weights, which is in kind of computer kind of executable analogy. It's just a binary, right? Like you basically you can run it, right? But you don't know how it was put together, right? And kind of and I think there are very typical and traditional trade-offs, right? So if you provide the data, a lot of data is now, first of all, can be sensitive, right? So the data is massive. And so a lot of companies like IBM were focused on what happens when you take command crawl, you take all the data scraped off the web. It contains a lot of garbage, and there is not enough human bandwidth to review it, right? So if you're IBM, you'll be liable if something comes through which is hurtful or harmful. And so one approach is basically, let's make, for instance, we have public data. We cannot allow all the public data to be used for training of these models, which when are used in some kind of business context. So what happens is you can establish a feedback loop. So you need an architecture where if you identify a problem in the training data, you're able to remove it. And so we're not yet at the stage where we have incremental training, right? So it would be very beautiful to have a composable model where you can say, this document is bad, remove it, and magically all the weights get, rebalanced, and, very cheaply and effectively, you have now a clean model. You cannot do this yet, but what you can do, you can basically trace back something to a training market, and the next time you train, you remove it, right? So this is the best kind of we can do right now. So I think one avenue of attack is, first of all, public data. We need to continuously review it, and for commercial use, we need to clean it up, right? And so for private data, what if you have a medical AI model? Obviously, it's trained on patient data, it may be anonymized, but I think it's a very difficult area, right? Like it's regulated. So you cannot provide training data for a certain context.
But this did seem like there was a little bit of like to be able to link to your this magic state of shifting something over. There's a lot of, there's a lot of pieces in there to be able to identify bias or be able to track things back to where that's money may come from. And it requires by nature having an open data set. So,
That's right.
right. Okay. So do we pass the mic over to you? To see what do you have to restate the question is like from your perspective, is there open source, open weights, open scripts, open data? Is there a value or reason one or the other that matters more? And what's your perspective on it from
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally we'd want all the above. I think that that's not going to happen. I think one important thing maybe to echo off your point is that, and this happens a lot in academia, but I also see this in industry, is that these closed models are almost seen as being more powerful. And so there's kind of this awe around, things like OpenAI's model that they're not releasing, or they're not going to say what the weights are, they're not going to say where things are trained. And that causes kind of this hype, which I think is a very negative thing. In a lot of the applications that I work on, so I work on a lot of safety critical systems, self-driving cars, it's very rare that we even get a piece of a complete data set, much less weights, much less what a model looks like. And I think it's very important for those safety critical systems. People will say, oh, it's because we want to protect people, we don't want to release the data, but it's actually a lot of the opposite. Mm-hmm. And that there's a huge history of this actually in artificial intelligence, all, back in the 60s and 70s, all the models and all of the data was all open by design. Everything was transparent and explainable. And somehow we've reached this point now where the less transparent, the less explainable it is, the more powerful it is. And I think that there's something inherently wrong there.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and Toby, and from your perspective, and this is, part of this is, being open source, having that label is a really important something when people are starting a company. It's something that venture capitalists are looking for. And then it comes into this, I've had this conversation where I keep saying, but that meta license, it's a chain around,
So for me personally, I'm kind of advising the fund on where to put money. And one of the things that I'm very conscious about is when startups say they're using these open source models, and I have to remind them of the debacle that happened with Facebook with the social graph. And so that was another movement that started out with a bunch of open source data sets that created the social graph. And so it's kind of looking like the same thing, right?
So what happened, sorry?
So Facebook created the social graph, got everyone using their API, and then changed the policy for the developers. Companies went under when they did that policy. So for funds, you just have to be conscious about where you're going to risk. We're a small fund. We're not a $250 million, fund. So we're fund 125 million. I have to be very conscious about where's the data coming from, right? That you're building this business on. And then is there going to be liability? Do we think we actually have this margin when we actually have that? Do we have liability? Is it going to be that? So, yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like
it is a conversation in investor circles.
So, and this really, the liability seems to come mostly around the open data, around data versus open or not, and that if there's any, and it sounds like if there's any risk of there being liability, once we just close it and not even explain why, because nobody, as a very smart person reminded me recently, nobody's going to admit that they have legal risk in their data set. They're just going to say it's closed and take it to you and not tell you why. So, okay. Cool. All right. Well, let's that's a great way to set the table as we move forward into the next slide to talk about usability. And I think that we've had this whole rise of developers, the kingmaker viewpoint, and all this particular perspective. One of the things I think that's been really powerful that I've been running into out there is how non-technical people are starting businesses around AI and stuff like that. So I think so. Toby, let me just start with you just to bounce the ball back this way. What effects do you anticipate being able to have like open source AI capabilities in the hands of everyone, essentially? And do you have any risks in this general usability or barriers that you're concerned about?
Well, so I personally see a huge opportunity. I could just take the example of the students from UCSC. Yeah, actually, this summer. So last June, you guys had a pitch competition. There was startups and people in the engineering department there. And so we recruited a few of these young ladies into a summer program and literally showed them how to pair up with a large language model and use it to actually accelerate themselves in their development skills. And I can tell you in just 3 months from June, July, August, I don't know if you want to show them the curve.
Yeah, we could. I'll get to you in a second.
It was amazing. Like I literally it took about a month, but after a month, they started out contributing me as the lead on the open source project. And like literally they kind of took the project over the finish line for me, the whole thing. We finished this whole project this summer and I did it with mainly UCSC, Toronto, student from where she was Gaza, one in India. So it's like 6 young ladies that really committed. I mean, every day they were on a stand-up. What did you say? What did you had them doing, managing the backlog. I mean, any startup I've invested in would be happy to hire these young ladies right now. And this was just 3 months.
And the whole dynamic of getting people to do their first commit to GitHub and all that kind of thing as well, like this, all that stuff accelerates.
All of them had never done a commit prior to this little 3-month program. And then the cherry on top for me, because I didn't get paid for any of this, I just did it because I wanted to do it. Help.
Yeah, that's not fair.
But they actually competed in a Bay Area hackathon. And these young ladies took second place.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Seriously, just cherry on top.
Yeah, and if you dig into this data, you can see like where Toby did a little enabling activity. I enabled a little bit, and then they just after that they just took off and they started to feed on each other.
And so Yasmin, she's actually a student here, top contributor, right? Anusha, she's I think Toronto. But literally all young ladies, all the guys fell off.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
So, but yeah, so I'm so proud. And so I think that if we could just use these AI tools for this, we are going to see a huge ROI. Like just in your students, just having them pair up and just kind of accelerate themselves, because industry is moving faster than what you guys are in school. And that's the disconnect that I saw in June that really like shook me, because these are like, that young Black lady, like she fought hard to get here, right? And so to see her so far behind the marketplace when she's about to come out of school, she's coming out like this fall. It just really shook me, and I just wanted to do something. So we, did this little summer program. Maybe, hopefully, we get some more engagement, next year. But that's what I see, and that's what really excites me about AI.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in about the usability and explainability and all the intersect here. I feel like this is somewhere that is in your Venn diagram.
Yeah. And I've also been impressed, like as an instructor, and students teach me things. The other day I was trying to analyze my data and they were like, why don't you use ChatGPT? I was like, oh, that didn't even occur to me. Like I could ask for help. But
just open up some Python and write it like it's. Yeah.
So I think maybe I'll talk about, the goods and then I'll talk about the bad. So I think for some of the, just like these applications, I think also empowering students, like they get so excited, they don't want to learn Vim or Emacs like I did. They want to,
Yep.
They're like, oh, let me show you this little, yeah, exactly. So I think for that, it's been revolutionary. I think there are also some challenges with education that I can also talk about, most of which is, now I get a lot of code in my class that's written by ChatGPT. That's impossible to debug. It doesn't work. Every student has an error.
I have some.
Oh, really? Oh,
We have some sidetrack.
Yeah.
Oh,
So I found that if you use TDD,
Test-driven development.
it will actually like isolate the LLMs. The models are getting so good And if you just, and I have a like super prompt, I'll share it with you, and it kind of sets you up. And I'm telling you, it blew me away. Like last night, I literally built this dude's MVP almost in a night.
Wow.
The whole backend API, this shit would have took me months. Like I did it in a night. And so, yeah, and I'll be happy to share that.
That's,
But yeah, TDD,
I'm ready.
try it out. If you're coding, you're gonna freak. You got wings now.
So I think it's, so I think for a lot of things, it's great. I think it's empowered a lot of people. I think it's changed the way that we've thought about AI and how we use it in our daily lives. I do think that there, especially from a transparency angle, there are some risks. Again, like thinking about people using this in classes and turning in code that's written by ChatGPT, doing this, they will use it during their exams on their cell phones in class. The other thing that I think is particularly interesting related to the transparency angle is that we can't trust the explanations that come from these systems. Their self-explanations are actually wrong. They're not explaining what the underlying model is doing. They're explaining what they think you want to hear, right? And I think that that's very dangerous. And people who don't know that can be kind of conned, right?
Yes.
They say, oh, of course, that makes a lot of sense. But the explanation is not what we call an XAI or explainable AI faithful. And I think that that's been a very important thing. And that's been something that's been very difficult, is that the people who work on post hoc explainability, trying to explain what these models are doing, we have metrics of what it means to be a good explanation. And when you apply those metrics to the self-explanations of these generative AI technologies, they don't align. So I think that that's one thing where kind of these things intersect, and that, that's something that I try and teach in my classes and other things too. But at the same time, I think it's a wonderful opportunity. I mean, I don't make graphs for my papers anymore.
I have a couple of thoughts on usability, right? So first of all, right, so I come from this, software engineering communities. I've been running meetups in the area for more than a decade, and it started with this traditional software engineering meetup and programming languages, and then, ran the biggest Scala meetup in the world. We started the first Spark meetup at SF Scala with Mateo when he was a graduate student at Berkeley, and then we kind of expanded, obviously, with big data revolution that led to data science and deep learning, first AI peak in 2017 and so forth, right? So there is this whole traditional software engineering. And so what's amazing, the COVID kind of reset completely. It's reset the score. So there's a changing of the guard, which happened after COVID. So all the old communities kind of got revamped, and new generation of developers came on board. And it's almost like they were born yesterday. So on the one hand, we had democratization, new masses coming in. We've seen this first with the data science boom. Everybody wanted to be a data scientist. So we had a lot of people changing careers, right, around the first peak of deep learning. So now we have, on the one hand, it's a massive opportunity. Everybody can be a developer. We have also multimodal LLMs, right? So which is just, Llama 3.2 is now multimodal. So now I've been at hackathons where people just throw, videos and photos, seeing the thing, and it makes cool demos. Right, that's good. I mean, they're not like it's hard to see how that becomes a product. But so I think there is, right. So it's super usable. The question is, how can it be made useful? And furthermore, how can we systematically improve it? And I think the role of academia actually dramatically upgrades, because I think academia is kind of lost because the cheating with ChatGPT, like everything becomes different. Sciences are in disarray because like AI is coming for your science, AI is coming for chemistry, AI is coming for physics, right? So what's going to happen? And so when I was thinking about this, and I see academics were very successful at AI, and so what really distinguishes them? So there are some top open source projects. My favorite is DSP out of Stanford, which is, they call it programming, not prompting LLM. So they want to systematically think, how do we program with LLMs? And we need to optimize the whole loop from prompt to LLM to fine-tuning to answer, right? Optimize the whole system based on your utility function. So to come up with this, that you need to step up from like the hustle and bustle of excitement of, you can do interesting things. You have to systematically and rigorously think about this. And so I was thinking, why are these folks so successful? Why do they come up, Berkeley and Stanford and UCSC, like why academics come up with very good open source projects? And I think there is a lot of experience in academia. How do you make sense of huge amount of information, right? Like it's coming at you at high speed. Now you need to figure out what is kind of, random transient, what is actually useful, how do you zoom in on what's useful, how you make high impact research. And I think academia really needs to step up this game because it should be a filter against all the hype and to really apply, intellectual rigor and identify the best opportunity. And so I think the best labs are able to do this, and that's even more important. Just like usability doesn't mean this will be useful. Another thing, software engineering tradition, like Toby said, I love to hear TDD because a lot of folks don't know about TDD, right? Or CI/CD, all this stuff is boring. But as AI systems come online, how can you entrust your most valuable assets, your data, your customer data, your financial data, to a blob of a poorly engineered system written in a dynamic language which has no protection against any kind of data corruption? Like people don't even think properly about it yet. But with the moment we have massive leaks and massive damage inflicted by the systems, people will come back to software engineering disciplines, right? So I think there will be another huge shift when this initial excitement and deployment at massive scale leads to all kinds of problems, which we know how to solve with software engineering. There should be a return to better software engineering. And so I see kinds of folks apply new languages, apply kind of, Rust and Zig and kind of interesting verifiers. Eric Meyer is doing interesting work in kind of bringing back data log. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff we can do basically on this kind of usable, but how can it be useful and safe?
The old is new again, over and over and over again, right? Cool. Okay. All right. Well, let's go on and talk a little bit about accessibility. But just because I think, and my setup around this is that open source has been iterating on being more accessible as a software to use to different kinds of people, reaching more parts of the world. But I also think the secret to open source success is that the hyper focus on users and what users need, get more users in, and then when they get here, lower barriers to entry, and they can find that, I can participate and contribute. So it has this kind of loop back on it. And so just in the concept of that potential and how everybody can suddenly talk about open washing, it's in the New York Times article. We've got just topics are now in front of people, governments, and big debates happening everywhere. So in terms of the potential risks and the gains that you can have, what do you see about around the accessibility and open source AI, and essentially what are the risks and what are the rewards of something focusing on this accessibility? And we went bounce. Leilani, do you feel like jumping and start off in the middle?
Sure, I guess.
Start from the middle.
Right. So about accessibility and open source.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. I mean, so I think one thing, maybe I'll talk about the educational component. I mean, I know there are some students here, but I feel like a lot of students don't know about open source and its history. And frankly, I didn't really know until I was a senior graduate student that this is a really important thing and a thing that we should do. Part of it is because my advisor is a big proponent of GNU and other things, so I got really into it. So I think it's something that, when I realized the power of it, it became very exciting. And I think it's very important to keep that accessibility. I think it's also important to kind of teach students those types of practices as well. That's something that they don't always see in these types of introductory classes. Like, my advisor said he would only use Emacs, so I had to learn how to use Emacs, and that ended up changing my life. But that's a whole other thing. But I think it's great, what the community is doing, and I hope that it's something that we can integrate more into, some educational practices that we have. There was a second part to your question.
Oh, well, it's just, it's that intersection. It's the way that AI can be more accessible or have accessible.
Oh yeah,
and so it can accelerate this dynamic or it can hinder it.
Yeah, it's hard. I'm not so sure. I think that there's one thing where these AI technologies, I think, especially some of the vision language models that you were talking about, can be very powerful, especially when they can generate their own captions for things like accessibility. So it's very important when we work on a lot of applications, starting to look at for what happens when vision language models don't know what they can't see, right? And that's very important, especially when you're creating applications for people who are visually impaired, right? Because if the VLM doesn't know what it's seeing, it has to be able to explain that. So I think for a lot of those types of accessibility angles, actually creating, alt text and other things, it does a really great job. But again, there are risks of hallucinations that they can't self-explain and other things.
It's and accessibility is a multi-faceted question. Another example I was thinking about, and reason when to Toby this, what you mentioned at the beginning that the fund that you work with is focused on having at least one Black entrepreneur, founder within the fund for, right? And so there's a whole accessibility angle around making the technologies available and other people being able to do things within, we're talking about what the students in class were doing. So I mean, but the kind of risks and rewards of being able to release that and make those things more
Well,
accessible.
I can tell you, like personally, my personal experience of access to technology was, I was young and I was part of a project called RoofNet, and it was an MIT project, and it was the first mesh Wi-Fi protocol. And I didn't know this. I was just excited to know. First, what got me excited was like anything wireless that the FCC wasn't charging you for, right? So that like got me excited. And by digging into this technology, I was able to build a business and then sell the business. And so that's my story of accessibility. Like it changed my life, right? So I think the more accessibility, the more lives we can impact. Yeah, there's going to need to be safeguards around AI. Yeah, we want to make sure the data is pure, but accessibility, yes, more tools that could get non-coded engineer minds building things, right? Because there's plenty of people probably in this room that have an idea of something you want to build, right? Now you can literally build with AI, and these models are just going to get better and better. The results are going to get better and better. And so I think tools that give that accessibility to people to start building without knowing Python, I think it's just going to be game changing. So that's exciting. Like I'm looking for those founders, right? Because that's, if you can literally build, I've met one guy that still has an engineering background, but he had been a product guy for 10 years, hadn't written code in 15 years. You know the guy.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Built the enterprise SaaS product, quit his job, took him 6 months, but he did it alone, just paired up with development. And this guy was like, he was at Sidecar. He wasn't at some little like startup. They were well funded. He was family paid. Like,
well, that's right. He saw a need, right? This is what it was. He was working in the business. He's like, you know what? We could really use this thing, and I'm sure that people would need it too. A B2B, like, yeah. So
accessibility, but got him to take the leap of faith from just a product guy to a builder. Now he did have some confidence because he wrote some code in college, and so he had a little bit more confidence than maybe some people with no engineering experience. But that's the gap I closed quickly.
So Alexy, we have one more topic after this to talk about public goods, but I'm going to drop it off to make sure we have time for a good Q&A section. But I want to let you finish off with us about accessibility and open source AI.
Just wanted to add one point on this. So I've been at Open Source Summit Europe and Aroa there and others. Like I noticed there was a massive community from Africa, and they it's closer. They don't make it as often to the US. And Africa is the explosive growth of developers that actively seeking mentorship and partnership. And so what I'm thinking, like imagine with AI now we have effectively live data coming in, right? So all things generating streams of data. Your life is now generating streams of data. Imagine now being able to spur development by knowing what people are doing, right? So, and actually directing investment and effort based on what we now can digitize. And I think this is the era when like a redevelopment of third world countries will happen enabled by data and AI. And I think we'll see dramatic growth. And I think, we make whole continents accessible to AI, right? We need to work with these communities. And I think that's going to be a completely different new kind of development. So like AI for good, I think is a massive focus for the next decade in these places.
Hey, I see. I know you're not on the critical. All right. Well, that was the topics of the things that I wanted to provide a bunch of things to think about into these areas. I heard some challenges to the academy in here, and some compliments to everything that people are doing, and I'm ready for some questions and so forth. Let's see. You're the first hand right up here.
All right, so I'll build upon some comments from Toby and Leilani first and ask you the following. That, if you look at the first generation of app developers on iPhone and mobile phones, that was an easy way to develop applications where you didn't have to worry about the back end because we had function as a service and packet as a service. But very soon we start to discover dead bodies because these ecosystems also eat from their customer base. And they absorb the most common skills of the developers and then leave them vulnerable to constantly having to acquire new skills. And they become users, not developers. I think that when I hear Leilani, she seems to be implicitly concerned about creating talented people who can have 40-year careers and they have some fundamental skills. Whereas Toby, in your comments, I hear urgency to time to value. So now I want you to discuss this tension. How do you reconcile that?
Could you restate the question?
Yeah, but so did either of you want to restate the question? Did you? I saw you captured well too.
Yeah, the people can hear better from 4 years.
So I think the question was kind of about, whether the kind of, if I may, the old school view of like, people should learn how to program for first principles, like they should use, open source editors versus they should use these generative AIs to learn how to program and build applications quickly, the kind of conflict between that, building on like, I think some issues of data curation and other things.
Yeah. And Alexy also commented about that cycle of people going out, coming back, and going out, coming back to the academy, right? So
I think it's a combination, right?
Yeah.
So like what I see is, even for myself, like I'm getting better. At coding, like it things that I forget or have forgotten. It just things that I didn't even know. Like I had never done a TypeScript app, right? Pretty good in JavaScript, but it never done it. I'm 25% into an app that, building using Next.js, not a Python app. Built the model, trained it, pulled some data out of that, got it running in my Node app. So I think it's a combination, right? Like what I'd like to see is like us enabling our kids to do more fast. That's where the market is, right? This is what, just to give you like, once again, young lady had never made a GitHub commit, is about to come out of college with a CS degree. Do you hear me? That's not okay. And so this is what I mean. Like we have to look. I don't have that problem in my house. My son's 10 and he's already doing JavaScript, right? So I just think we need to do better by our kids. And these tools are a game changer way that we can help our kids do more fast. And that's the way I see it. Like they were telling my kids not to use ChatGPT. By the time my son finished, like it's officially allowed in the school. Literally. So
well, I think you.
I mean, I agree. I do. I think there are huge opportunities. I think there are also, edge cases where things go wrong. I don't know. Maybe it's just I'm old and I'm like, oh, I learned how to program in Vim and I never knew what an IDE was. But, I do think that there are some basic fundamentals that I see that some students are lacking because they rely on these generative technologies. For example, like contrary to your point, I have people who do a git rebase hard to fix all their merge commits, and I'm like, oh,
Well, so look,
ah.
It's like you didn't have to burn the entire manuscript to the ground or retype it from scratch.
well, I think, but I think what I hear is there's a need that we need to like teach them how to use the LLMs better, because
Exactly.
I wasn't, to be honest, I wasn't the best at GitHub. Like this dude doesn't even write code and he's the GitHub magician,
Yeah.
right? And so I literally saw him and I was like, oh, no, you're not gonna outdo me. It's like not. Okay, and so I use that as my motivation, but I use ChatGPT as my cheat sheet.
Yeah.
Well, and part of this is the models the models, like anything, can learn to give us better answers about how to do the practices, but giving us the underlying reasons why and the culture around the stuff.
Exactly. Oh, I lost all my history, and I'm like, what did you do? Oh, I asked ChatGPT how to solve it. I'm like, oh. But I do think there are wonderful opportunities, just like the stories you've told. And again, I learn something new every day. But
Well, let's pop the next one. I think this is one, but yeah.
Yeah, okay, so I'm old enough to actually went through first, like, maybe not the first, maybe second type of AI, because we should acknowledge there is an AI research in 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, okay?
It was,
The one that I went through was late 80s, summer 90s. And then the problem was there, I just want to tell you, was a lot of sort of mythology about what they are going to deliver. It did not. Few years later, if you find out someone working with the neural net and things like that, people will like, forget it. I mean, you are not doing anything relevant. So the point is that by pumping up the hype, there's a high risk of actually of tragedy and kind of making mistakes that are not just, in a way that there may be a useful technology there that is actually very useful and long lasting, but we need to have like an honest view of this. Okay, so just
can you phrase that as a question for us, or?
yes, I want to frame the question. So my question is that, first of all, like just another comment, like we speak today is about some tools change in time, like really change. Like what you know in the 80s with 80% or probably today. So things changes, so just to acknowledge that as well. Now, my question is, when it comes to AI, I'm questioning so how we can move out away from mythological piece that we're gonna take all out of work and jobs to something realistically, and actually how you see particularly development of mathematics, which is related to AI. Practically, like to move from the point of using these structures, mathematical structures, to basically kind of compress data in a way, to actually really understanding their dynamical properties and how much, for example, in your company, you are excited to actually employ people who actually is going to go after your work and check actually what you are doing.
Did I get the question? So it's how are we going to go from having a mythological piece that just magically does things, which isn't the case, just something that we really understand. We have things like mathematical models that are understandable and explainable. Is that I think that's what the question.
Well, when I say about understanding, I took like a standard which is known for centuries, which is that I show you mathematical proof, and then anyone in the room can agree on that.
Yeah.
And there is no like, it's data or that. What we all agree what's what. Okay.
Like the equivalent of mathematical proof yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I can take a stab at this. I mean, first of all, I think I have some friends who work at frontiers of explainability in academia in Northeastern. There's a very strong lab to do this, and work with a partner at Amazon. I don't think realistically we have any explanations for neural networks yet, right? Like if you look at OpenAI, they have a small model trying to explain what the large model representation is. So first of all, I think that's a long-term research. So what realistically we can do. So I know I'm at a company called Neo4j, which existed for a couple of decades, and basically it's building knowledge graphs. So I propose a very simple, this one old intellectual trick. Like let's make a distinction between knowledge and textual strings. And LLMs are spitting out strings or pixels. They're not knowledge, right? Like who can decide what is knowledge. I posited only humans. Like we can decide that something is knowledge versus a bunch of text and data. So, ultimately, it will always be humans who will be making these distinctions, and they will be making it, for instance, in the context of legal or medical decisions. And so, I've been at this industrial AI conference in Stanford, and one of the folks, a chemist, basically said, AI cannot be a stakeholder in anything because it doesn't own anything, and it's not a stakeholder. It's ultimately the humans, right? So let's make this distinction. Now, the second question is, since humans will always judge the output and recommendations of AI and work as kind of human AI systems forever, we will never be removed at some level. We can relegate lower levels of decision making, operations, so forth. But ultimately, there will be humans always looking over this. There will be AI managers reporting to humans. Humans may be reporting to AI manager, but ultimately, some humans should be saying this is useful, this is not, right? And so, knowledge graph, which we are building, very traditional way, like all the car companies are customers, they put all the cars, millions of cars into a big hierarchical system, which you can consult. And so there's a new pattern of AI architecture called GraphRec, where you can right ontologies, and you can basically give in for instance, a very simple question, you can ask it from your favorite RAG system. Give me all investors in, Toby's company X, right? Maybe it's public information, maybe it's Crunchbase. So RAG will fail because in vector space, all this stuff will be collapsed. If we have, knowledge graph mapping Crunchbase, we will be found from this query, this node, investors in the company, then we'll go into a graph query using Cypher, the graph query language, and it will enumerate exactly all the things. So you need a compound system, which basically multiple, actors, agents, and maybe humans, right? So there will be multiple loops. So I think we need to make like operational distinction how we use these tools right now without knowing fully what they do, is basically just glorified screwdrivers and then harness them with knowledge frameworks like knowledge graphs, which can validate.
Like some of the, I guess, more useful data that was scooped in by the LLMs was things that were, there's a query language, right? Sparkle and RDF. So that stuff is very useful to them, right? And so that's what it's kind of referring to. And I'm a big believer. I was a sim tech buff before it was cool, and I'm all about the ontologies. Like I totally agree. That's the way we get there. It's the only way we get there.
So determining this.
Yeah.
Carlos, you're on.
A quick comment on the question. So the quick comment is like that, which I think we've been here before in the history of in multiple ways, right? There's like the fifth generation or fourth generation databases, right? We're supposed to automate everything, and of course they ran into problems because when something went wrong, nobody understood the bugs, right? We have the same thing today with linkers. So if something goes wrong, very few people already understand where that compile error comes from. It is actually, I think, one of the fundamental frustrations of any student who tries to prototype. So there's all these parallels to understandability that we have also in other parts of the system. And if you think about it, when I kind of look at this and say, well, today we program in high-level programming languages, and we don't care about the assembly code, at least in most cases, right? And so to some extent, when we talk about weights, right, that is sort of like assembly code, but we are now starting to develop this way. I like your comment really well, is we have these better and better coding environments, including, with the help of AI, that actually help us understand the code and prevent us from making bugs. So my question is, as we rely more on AI, there's been sort of like, I've heard this in multiple places, that people are really now starting to shut down those open data sets because they don't want to, just like in open source, right? There's open source projects which change the licenses because they didn't want to be just watching other people making money on
the hyperscalers.
Yes, yeah. So I see sort of the same thing happening with data, right? And so what is actually the economic model, especially when we talk about openness, open source, it's still a big discussion about the economic model. And I think that's really important for academia to consider as well, right? Where should we work in academia on things to create better economic models that will not only make AI as it exists today actually sustainable in the future, because I think there's a real danger that it won't be, but also how to make actually the quality of the data better, right? And I think I'm just riffing off like Jeremy Lanier, who had some ideas about new economic models of how to get better data and make data production sort of part of that pipeline, AI pipeline.
Well, let me just take a point of moderator's privilege to drop one piece in here. The point about companies changing their licenses and in response to business pressures and primarily also response to their investors telling them it's time to do that because we told you we're probably going to do that from the beginning, because that is one of the models that startups are facing where VCs want the founders to also be maintainers so they can control of this project. There's a lot of data that's coming up there's data that's coming to prove the point that I'm just going to make it brief, which is the reason why those companies failed and had to change their licenses is they did not build an ecosystem of other people who gave a crap about the code base and who built products based off of it. And so when the time came for hyperscaler to put the pressure on them, they turned around and they had no friends to back them because they insisted on 90 to 95% of the code was written by employees of those corporations. And then once those companies changed their licenses, they stopped being innovative. All the innovation goes away from what's happening there. So Stephen O'Grady, I think, has got a recent paper about this and some of the things that get into this. But there's going to be that, just like this being around again in the 2000s, and then now again we're having these cycles of people going through this business model change stuff because they didn't understand that it's an R&D model that you need to. That's a big thing. It's not just a free developer or marketing tool. So, point of thing. But we have some agreement and disagreement on that. We have about 5 more minutes of comment left. I give the panelists a chance to respond to the topic really quick and see if we can catch a couple of questions. So, do you have anything else to add to the response to Carlos' question about how we're going to address this?
The economic model.
The economic models, yeah. Thank you.
How to make people, encourage people to actually provide data.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things that I've seen. One is my buddy Reg Snodgrass has it's kind of like a Web3 model around data, and you share your data and you get compensated with like tokens and I'm forgetting the name of the company. I'll get you the name.
It's a handful.
Yeah, they're the most interesting one that I've seen. And then another one is this AI company, Quario, that I'm an advisor. They actually put a white paper out with Salesforce 5 years ago around using their deterministic AI system to create a data exchange to feed into AI systems.
Right. Yeah.
And so there is some thought. I've heard some thought like publicly around it. But the one that my buddy Reg is doing is probably the one that's the most virtually out there. Like he's actually making money in commerce, like exchanges on data and building up a really big repo of data. And it's not open source, but it's like in a DAO, and you have to take a look at it. But he was the guy that built the open API platform for Lucid and the telcos. So he is definitely one to watch there. Yeah.
Any other thoughts on economic models or responses around?
I can just add that we need to think about this, right? Because basically all of this original success was using common crawl, which people, gathered using basically the volunteer work and donations to host it, right? And so that's even fair that a few companies can benefit from this. And so, the ultimate, we have now all these lawsuits against OpenAI, right? So I think the ultimate fair model is propagate valid back to the people who created the initial data. And then, of course, you need to figure out how to decompose it. And Web3 is one way to do it. I'm very skeptical of this. Like it's kind of like solution looking for a problem. Now they latched onto AI data exchange that may or may not work. Right? A lot of people have aversion. A lot of people think this is actually the use case for this, right? So the jury's out of that, right? I still need to see any actual implementation, right, outside of that community. But I think we need to figure out effectively micropayments to people who contribute the data, and so we need composable models. We need to understand, and that goes back to the safety, right? Like what does some data set contributes to the overall model? If it's unsafe, we need to remove it. Also, if the model is using it, we need to pay for it, right? And if we figure out the architecture, which allows us to do this, then we can have a lot of fun, basically, in safety world and in fairness. And then academics can contribute all the data sets and be paid for this, right? And then we'll incentivize to actually produce public data sets.
So we had these two hands shoot up right at the end of my moderator's comment from before. We have 90 seconds left before we need to
So I
wrap.
have my
And we also have lunch coming, so.
a short variation of this question. Sometimes you have a project in which you want the models like GPT, OpenAI, Anthropic to learn about your thing. So you want to create an open source repository in which you populate a lot of data, maybe whatever format they want, so that your tool is useful for everybody. There is any such open source repositories in which you host the data and then all the models will pull from it, and you don't have to worry about did it pull my GitHub repo or not. I don't know any such place because you want them to train on your data and you're able to create extra
If
data.
you publish it as RDF, like it's gonna get souped up.
There's also your powered stuff.
Oh, well, I'm sorry, conversation, we have a lunchtime and a break afterwards. We have one. Go ahead.
This is like maybe a
Please
close
go.
question. So a friend of mine is a middle school teacher. So when we talk, she'll, if there's an interesting topic, she'd like to teach it to her middle school students. So she'll use ChatGPT or Gemini or something to make a lesson plan. And like most of us, gets a response. It's full of garbage and has to go fact check and edit all of this. So here in the open source community and all these adjacent communities, we think a lot about the model's validity or its explainability, and we have a lot of frameworks and tools for understanding why this garbage is happening and what we have to counter. So my question to you is, what aspects or principles do you think that you'd like the larger public or the users of these models to be thinking about that we have over here?
I have answers, but I won't join in.
Be careful. That's, verify. Even if you have to verify it, just think how much time you're still saving. Yeah. You're still crushing. So that's the perspective we have to keep in doing the actual work of verifying, right? Is that we're still crushing. Just verify. These systems will get better. The models will become compositable, right? You'll be able to, like you said, train, pull data out on the fly. We're not there yet, but we'll get.
But in terms of practices, I think that
right now, practices is just verify.
Well, and part of this is the two key things to remember. Everyone, whatever somebody thinks of, you're about to reinvent the wheel. So go and look for people like, oh, I got this great, whatever. There's a practice and a way and something to do it. Open source methodology, stuff around that. And the other is when you have a brand new idea that no one's ever heard of before, like it's a bow and arrow, somebody else is probably also working on it. And so there's some fundamental truths that are going on, but ultimately we're all trying to share these practices, but they're thankfully open has a meaning, and when it isn't loose. Open source has a specific meaning, either is or isn't. Open has a meaning, and there's practices around that. So look for that brand. Open practices and anything around it. That's a really open scholarship, open science. All these things are bringing the practice together around those four essential abilities to freely access something, to share it, to modify it, and to use it for whatever purpose you want. And that is a wrap. Thank you.